Hello, wellness warriors. The other day I was watching The Diet Doctor, and he was going over this article. I'm not going to dive into the article itself in terms of the medical issues that were there or the faulty science, because I feel like The Diet Doctor did an amazing job, and I'm going to link his video down below. What I want to really talk to you guys about is how there's still this desire to take a ketogenic diet that has helped so many people to regulate not only their weight, but their health. So, PCOS, diabetes, heart problems, like the list of things that keto has helped us to solve goes on and on. And then the authors, for some reason, present the information in a very unbalanced way. But not only that it's unbalanced, the part that I want to talk about is how they're actively trying to fool us. There are 7 really important points I want to make about this article. And I hope by the end of this video, you're going to be able to tell how to judge whether a review article or a research article is being fair in the way that it's presenting information. Wellness warriors, if you want to manage your weight, you actually need to improve your health. On Mind Blowing Health and Wellness with Violet, my goal is to help you to achieve the mindset that allows you to do just that. If this is something you're working on, subscribe because I make new videos every week. I want to get this right, so I'm going to be looking at my tablet for some of this stuff. First, the name of the article, Ketogenic Diets and Chronic Disease, Weighing the Benefits Against the Risk. So let's go through the things that caught my attention that frustrated me. In the first paragraph of this article, there are 2 things that jumped out at me right away. First, they say such diets affect diet quality. They're talking about keto diets, typically increasing the intake of food linked to chronic disease risk and decreasing foods that are found to be protective. I want to point out at this point that they have made that bold claim without actually defining what keto is, what foods you eat on keto. So right away, you're not even a paragraph into this review, and you're being cautioned that if you eat a ketogenic lifestyle, you will be increasing foods that lead to health problems. This is a tactic that ensures that anyone who doesn't finish the article already starts off with a belief that keto isn't healthy. The second thing I want to point out, there's a statement that says, given often temporary improvements, unfavorable effects on dietary intake, and inadequate data demonstrating long-term safety, for most individuals, the risk of a ketogenic diet may outweigh the benefits. I want to point out again, this is still in paragraph number 1. We haven't even finished one paragraph, and they sum up by saying that keto has more risks than the benefits you're going to get. Right away, we can see that this review does not seem unbiased. There is a clear lean towards don't do keto. Now, what I do like is that they do give us a nice little chart here to define how they're labeling keto, how they're defining low carb, etc. What I want to point out to everyone, though, is that the 4-to-1 and the 3-to-1 types of keto are not the kinds of keto diet that doctors who are proposing you do keto are suggesting. Those are unhealthy ways of doing keto. The 4-to-1 is actually the original that was done with epileptics way back in the 1920s. The way that they were doing it originally used poor quality oils, and the real main focus was stopping the seizures. And it wasn't until later that they realized that there were other negative health effects coming because they weren't focused on food and other health things. They were just strictly trying to stop seizures. I think that it was important for us to understand that that is not the diet that's being proposed for people to follow today. I also want to point out that if you're looking at that chart, they also talk about low carb and they talk about Atkins. Although low carb and Atkins are 2 other diets that I believe are much better for you than doing a standard American, standard Canadian, standard Caribbean diet, they're still not ketogenic diets. So if you do an Atkins diet or a low carb diet, on a low carb diet, you're still going to have much more carbohydrate intake than you would ever have on a keto diet. And on an Atkins diet, I do believe, but I could be wrong, that you get to reintroduce some carb. So you go back up above what is accepted for keto. Therefore, even though they are lowering your carb count down if you're coming from standard American diet, which is great, they still will not give you all the benefits of a keto diet. So I want to point out that the way that they've begun their discussion of this allows them to use diet information that's not strictly coming from keto. For the actual definition of general keto, which is the one that I kind of found in there that would probably apply to most, they still are using 50 grams of carbs or less, which technically is the definition of keto. So I'm not going to argue that one. And technically, if you're doing 2,000 calories, then 10% or less would be in that 50 grams of carbs or less. However, I want everyone to understand, when you look up how to do keto, you don't see that definition, because most of the keto friendly doctors that are helping people to manage their health and focus on health are encouraging people to do 20 grams of carbs or less. And if you happen to find a doctor that's talking about percentages, they're using 5%, not 10%. For the purpose of this article, I'm talking about calories just to show us that when you start putting percentages there, it opens the door that you could go over your carb count. Because even if you eat 4,000 calories worth of food in a day, you're still supposed to be under 20 grams or 50 grams, whichever one you want to go with. You're supposed to be under that number to be healthy on a ketogenic lifestyle. All of this to say that they give that chart and they still haven't really talked about what people eat on keto, or they haven't defined, which again, I understand because this is a review article. So I'm just pointing out that for the novice person who comes into this article trying to understand if keto is healthy, when they say it's going to introduce foods that are bad for your health, but they don't say what the foods are, that's confusing to me because keto did not introduce any new foods to my diet. Now, the other thing that I'm going to point out in this article that I found extremely frustrating was their use of citations. So there are certain points where you see that there's nice citations there, those ones and twos and threes. If you do click on it, it takes you to the article they're talking about, and you can see which research that they got that information from. But then there's these other parts in the article where there's no citations given, but huge statements being made. The one I'm going to pull to your attention, and again, we're still on like page 1 of this article, just pointing this out to you. The effects on nutrient metabolism, the last little section of this paragraph says protein utilization is also altered on a ketogenic diet, and the body shunts as much protein as possible to gluconeogenesis, while the minimum necessary amount is used for tissue repair. So we know from Dr. Fung that this just isn't true, that our body is not that stupid. He pointed out how ridiculous it was for us to think that our body would go through all the effort of storing fat on us for the day when we don't have energy to turn around and use muscle for energy when we have fat on board. It actually doesn't happen in any large amount. Now, I say in any large amount. Guess what? Even people doing a standard American diet, standard Canadian diet, have that happen anyway, because we sleep overnight. We're not eating any carbohydrate. And because we are carb eaters and we need carb all the time, our body does make some, and then it does that. So this idea is faulty. This statement makes it seem like if you don't eat enough carb, your body is going to go into this loop of breaking down your tissue, where when I eat 18 grams of carbs, I'm actually over. So I haven't even reached the 50 that most people would be eating if you followed their definition of keto wellness warriors. I really need you to understand that when you see stuff like this, where they're taking an information like that, they're saying it, and there's no citation to prove their point, it's because there's no information that actually proves that. Otherwise, they would have shown where they got that information from. And again, at the very beginning of the article, to scare you away from doing a ketogenic lifestyle. So the fifth thing I want to point out is that they say that a keto diet is low in fiber because we are cutting out all those fruits and vegetables that we're supposed to eat. Now, I'm going to admit that if you watch my videos, I'm pretty hard on fruit. Like, if you're not eating avocado or olives, I really say like that you're playing with your health, and I don't encourage people to eat fruit. However, every single low glycemic vegetable that you can find, I encourage you to eat. So, first of all, they say that we cut out. No, every keto friendly doctor encourages you to eat low glycemic vegetables. Guess what low glycemic vegetables have? Lots of fiber. The second thing I'm going to say is the standard American, standard Canadian, standard Caribbean is not necessarily eating all that much vegetables or fruits for that matter. Well, maybe fruits, but they're not eating that much vegetable. I eat more vegetables now than I did when I was doing a standard diet. And the funny thing is, the more people I talk to who do keto, the more I see that to be the case. That they're eating more salads and more vegetables and more healthier vegetables than they ate when they were doing a standard diet. Why? Well, because it's mostly what you're eating. I challenge anybody who's watching this video right now who is doing keto, please put in the comments below. Are you eating less vegetables than you were on standard American diet, or are you eating more vegetables than you were? If you learn to do keto from a keto friendly doctor, chances are very good. Not only are you still eating veg, so if you were a veg eater, you're still doing that, but very likely if you weren't a veg eater, you're eating veg now. Most doctors tell us to do that. Before I forget, if you're getting value out of this review article, please hit the like button. It does help the channel. The sixth thing I want to point out is talking about specific conditions. In the seizures one, I noticed that they said that 50% of people who did not respond to medication for their seizures responded to a ketogenic diet. So of the 30% that doesn't respond to medication, half of those people got success from keto. But according to them, there's poor adherence to the diet. The thing I want to point out is that it seems to me that when they're talking about that, they're again going back to the old studies where people were being given the 4-to-1 keto diet that was based on poor quality oils. And the reason that I'm going to say that I can say it's the 4-to-1 type of diet that they're talking about was because they said the food choices were limited and the people needed to be supplemented to do the keto diet. That's not the case on the modern 20 grams or less keto diet that we do today. In the section where we're talking about weight loss, they said that, so I'm going to read this. I wrote it down because I don't want to get it wrong. The study is reviewing ketogenic diets, and then they turn around and they said that the diets that were used in the studies included low carbohydrate diets. And then they said that their low carbohydrate diets were defined as 40% of their calories coming from carbs or less. I want to point you back up to the chart because they're now breaking their own rule. In the chart, they said it was 10 to 25% of calories coming from carb that made something low carb. Here they're including studies that were 40% or less. And if we do a quick bit of math, if you've had 40% of your calories coming from carbohydrate, if I had a 1500 calorie diet, then that would mean that I'd have 150 grams of carbs if it's 40 or less. So actually, to get to the 130 grams of carbs, you have to be on a 1400 calorie diet. But now, can I just point out that we are not only now doing a low carb diet, but we're also doing a low calorie diet? If I do low calorie plus low carb, part of the problem is that my body's not used to that, and I'm actually going to be hungry all the time. And so then the lack of adherence to the diet becomes quite obvious because you're just doing a low calorie diet. I want to point out to everyone that they keep saying that they're looking at keto, but they're not looking at keto. They're looking at low calorie diets in order to get these numbers, or they're also looking at low carbohydrate diets. They're lumping all these things together and calling them keto. So right away, I want to just let you know I did read the entire article, but all the conclusions that they came to after that point, you realize that they are confounding what diet they're comparing to what, because they keep calling something keto, but then the numbers that they're showing don't make any sense. And so therefore, we're not comparing keto diets to low fat diets or keto diets to low calorie diets. We're comparing low calorie low, everything's jumbled up together. They're doing low carb on some occasions, which, by the way, as much as I feel that low carbohydrate diets can be helpful for people who are coming from standard American diet to a low carbohydrate diet, who don't have much metabolic issues yet, that they can totally have a good situation for themselves, much better than staying standard American diet. It doesn't mean that you don't still have issues on a low carbohydrate diet, because you're still eating the sugar that causes issues. So again, wellness warriors, as I'm reading this, it's so frustrating, because it's kind of like if I tried to prove that lifting heavy weights was the same efficacy in building big muscles as doing Pilates. And so I'm going to do a review of all the research on lifting heavy weights and doing Pilates. And I'm going to prove that the amount of muscle gained was similar between both. However, in my lifting heavy weights category, I have some research that's about lifting heavy weights, but I also have a bunch of research that's from runners, so joggers, people who run and jog. And then I'm comparing that to Pilates. Can we see how the results that I'm going to get are probably going to be similar? Because if you're a runner or if you do Pilates, maybe you could have about the same muscle gain. But neither of these two are the same as going to the gym and actually lifting heavy weights for the purpose of building muscle. If I'm jogging, I'm jogging. If I'm doing Pilates, I'm doing Pilates. If I'm lifting heavy things, that's completely different. But that's what they're doing here. They're taking low carb, they're taking calorie restriction, they're taking keto, making a category, and then comparing them to calorie restriction or comparing them to low fat or they're confounding their evidence, and they're not comparing what they're saying they're comparing. The final point I want to make is that as I was looking through, some of the research was very short. If you're going to do research on weight loss, if you're going to do research on how food affects the body, it's known that you have to have at least 6 months to have a good view. And most keto doctors that I watch cringe when they see 3 months, right? 6 months is kind of like, okay, you're starting. You want a year, you want 2 years, right? Add to that most people who start a ketogenic lifestyle, when they start, lose a lot of water weight, have an adaptation phase, and all of that isn't actually your body like doing the good work yet, right? It's starting, but it's not all the way there. So how do we get to the part where we know how the food is actually affecting us if we're not allowing enough time for the person? So each individual is different. It took me 4 days. I've heard some people say it took them 2 weeks to get through keto flu. How do we know that you've actually now settled into the diet and are eating what you're supposed to eat and eating it appropriate? That's the other thing, is that, the instructions you're getting so in these research that they're telling us, because they keep talking about keto, but then they're talking about low carb and they're mixing everything together, calorie restriction, they're mixing everything together. We don't even know if the research that they're talking about had people who were doing keto correctly, meaning 50 grams of carbs or less for their definition. I want to point out that 50 grams of carbs or less is another sticking point for me, because the keto doctors have all concluded that although 50 grams of carbs or less is technically keto, for the average person who was on a standard American, standard Canadian diet to get into a ketogenic state, any standard diet, not even just any standard diet, to get into a ketogenic state, they would very likely need to do 20 grams of carbs or less. Now, once you're down to 20 grams of carbs or less, you have a much better chance of getting into ketogenic state. So we again go and get into that issue where even if we're talking about studies that were run properly by unbiased scientists, if you put people at 50 grams of carbs or less, they might not have actually gotten into that ketogenic state. So then you're still not comparing or examining what you think you're examining, right? Because if the person didn't get into a ketogenic state, they would have to keep going down to get. So again, it's question marks. How was the study done? Was the goal to get the person into a ketogenic state and then look at how they reacted? Or was the goal for them to eat a certain way and look at how they reacted? The two different ideas matter. As I read this article, the one thing that I could get very clearly is they wanted to make it sound like keto was a very dangerous diet to do. They wanted to make it sound like it was so hard to do. They wanted to push you away from doing a keto diet. And the question is why? And I don't know. I mean, this is a review of research. There shouldn't be biases, but clearly we hear them, and it makes me think about drug companies, food companies. They want us to eat their food, they want us to take their drug. If we're all healthy, there's nothing for them to sell, right? So I don't know why these reviewers would do this, but it does make me think of, is there someone else behind this? Wellness warriors, I want you to start asking yourself why you're doing what you're doing. Are you trying to improve your health and have the strongest possible body that you can have? Or are you going to choose your foods in a way that helps the food companies to get rich, the drug companies to get rich, but your health to decline? I want to thank you for watching Mind Blowing Health and Wellness with Violet. Check out this video here that I talk about how much veg I was actually eating when I started a ketogenic lifestyle. I was eating a lot. I can't wait to talk to you guys again next week. You might want to subscribe and hit that bell so you can join the discussion that we're going to have next week.